This time, I had a conversation about DevOps. So during that, I had a lot of technical issues, and I believe for me, the first time when I was able to fully listen to all the stories and examples shared was when I was editing the video. Good news is, despite all the challenges, we managed to do the recording, and this time I'm super happy to present you Martin Hinshelwood, a man with a lot of talents, a man with enormous amounts of topics he can professionally talk about and share his knowledge. And in this conversation, I'm happy to show you one of those areas of his expertise. So I hope you will enjoy. Hello, welcome everyone. Welcome to Joanna's tribe, or Joanna's tribe, if you want. So today I have another, as always, amazing guest, because I'm not inviting not amazing people to my tribe. Wonderful person, important person in my life, very good friend, and I believe his knowledge and expertise is pretty broad. So before recording, I was thinking what should be our topic of today's conversation, and I realized that I would love to use the expertise and knowledge of Martin when it comes to DevOps. So this will be our today's topic, and I hope and expect that you will enjoy this conversation. So, Martin, pleasure to have you here. Would you be so kind and introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. My name's Martin Hinshelwood. I'm a professional Scrum trainer with Scrum.org. I'm a professional Kanban trainer with Pro Kanban. And I have been a Microsoft MVP in GitHub and DevOps for the past 15 years. In a few days, renewal is 1st of July. So I will find out in a few days whether I get 16 years or I've not done enough to be recognized, because it's something you have to get every year. But yeah, that's that. I can't when I especially when we're talking about Agile. The way I always introduce myself is that I kind of sit with a foot in both camps. There's a lot of people in the Agile space that believe that Agile is nothing to do with technology, and there's a lot of people in the technology space that believe that the same thing, right, but from the opposite side. And I find that because I had a lot of experience in the past in software engineering and then through DevOps, it's kind of brings a little bit of a unique perspective that you're into Agile and DevOps, right? And I think of them as two sides of the same coin. That's the way I think about it.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your introduction. So, speaking about DevOps, I can imagine that at least some of my audience might have not clear, blurry, or absolutely no idea what we are talking about. Could you please
Yeah.
try to introduce that topic to us?
Yeah, what the heck is this thing that people are
Exactly.
talking about?
Exactly.
I think DevOps it's an interesting thing because there isn't as clear a definition of what it is as there is for Agile, because you can look to the Agile Manifesto. For Scrum, you can look to the Scrum Guide. And there's not really a clear agreed that everybody agrees upon definition of DevOps. I like a particular definition that comes from a gentleman called Donovan Brown, who was kind of the head of DevOps at Microsoft. And he says DevOps is the union of people, processes, and products to enable the continuous delivery of value to our end users. So that's people, process, and products. I have that on a t-shirt somewhere, but people, process, and products. And I think that's very apt because one of pre-pandemic, Agile was very anti-products, right? We were all, the best way to do stuff is stickies on a wall, right? No, get rid of Jira, get rid of AzureDevOps, get rid of, you don't worry about the tools, focus on the work. But then everybody went home, and suddenly you can't do stickies on a wall anymore, and you have to start thinking about and talking about tools and how you can use those tools to enable this new way of working. And I think that's something that had been very lacking in the Agile space, and it's starting to come in. So you could say Agile is the union of people, processes, and products to enable the continuous delivery of value to our end users as well, right? We can swap DevOps for Agile, which is why I think about it as two sides of the same coin, right? You've got one side that says DevOps, that is people coming from an engineering perspective and looking at the same problem and saying, how do I want to solve this problem? And then I know Agile also came from people with engineering background, but they were looking at it from effectively a management perspective. How do we organize the people around how we deliver usable working product? Whereas DevOps focuses quite a lot on tools and things that can help us. Agile focuses more on how we enable people to do stuff. And I think those are great different lenses that we can bring together into one unified thing. Because if you, my favorite thing is if you speak to Agile folks, they'll say that DevOps is part of Agile. It's just part of the story, right? If you're doing software teams, then you're going to need some DevOps. And if you talk to DevOps folks, they'll say, well, Agile's just part of the story of delivering products, right? They're really saying the same thing. DevOps and Agile for me is that same thing. And they both came out of Lean, right? So Agile for me, I people may argue with me, but for me, Agile is what was born out of this idea of applying Lean and common sense principles to how we organize around doing stuff when the work is complex, right? And DevOps is the application of Lean when we're talking about the actual technology, right? And then the technology is reaching into the people space, and in the Agile side, that people are reaching into the technology space. That's the way I think about it. That's probably a bit too much.
Thank you. And actually, I would dare to say, for me, it's too little because I have engineering and technical background, and I
Yep.
feel like I'm super aligned with you, and I understand what you are saying. But let's face some facts, reality. There are a lot of scrum masters, coaches, consultants, team members that may not have your background and your expertise. I feel like I need example,
Sure.
story, something that can help us create a picture of DevOps and why it is important for teams, for companies.
Yeah, I'm not as good at stories. I'm more a facts person. That's my Aspie nature creeping in. Um, the I'm trying to think how to. So there's a great visionary in the DevOps space, who Sam Guggenheimer, who was at HP and then moved to Microsoft, and is kind of the idea reason why Azure DevOps exists in the first place as a product. And the vision that he presented was a completely connected story, not just for the people, but for the products that we build. So why can't I look at a piece of code in I want to understand, I need to go change this piece of code, I need to go add some capability to it. Why can't I know what tests are impacted by my changes? Right? What tests am I going to have to go run? I've got 100,000 tests in my test plan. How many of these things am I impacting? How big is this change? Right? What do I have to go run? And that includes manual tests as well. Why not for manual tests too? And that's just one example of that connected strategy. I want to be able to look at a release, right? Something that I'm going to give to my customers, and I want to know exactly what's in there. And I don't mean the code, right? I mean, I want to know what backlog items were completed in order to result in this. How does that link to the ideas that we had and the goals that we're trying to achieve? What is that link through the system? Enabling transparency, right? That's core to Agile, core to Scrum, is enabling transparency, being able to see what's going on. And DevOps is really about bringing that to the forefront, which is why there's a lot of the stories that was always what Lean was about. You have to be able to see what's going on to then be able to look for patterns and optimize for some of those patterns, right? So that Lean world that came out of Lean manufacturing then progressed into the software world and hit much greater degrees of complexity, because most of Lean, the bedrocks of Lean, was developed in the manufacturing space, where there's a lot more consistency in what's happening, right? So there's predictability. And then we move into a highly complex space, and how do we change the way we do things? And that's where we have to think of what are the things that are waste, right? Lean is a lot about the elimination of waste. The elimination of waste on the factory floor is getting rid of all wait times, getting rid of all slack, getting rid of, you want to get rid of a lot of those things. You might need some slack, but you want to get rid of a lot of that waste. When you directly apply that to creative work, you can kill the creativity, because you eliminate what looks like waste, which is somebody sitting there thinking, right? But in our world, whether it's Agile, building software, writing novels, content, marketing campaigns, all of those things, there's a lot of thinking on how we're going to do this. And you might do something and it's wrong, right? It doesn't work. It doesn't have the outcome we expect. And if you had a machine that was making stuff and it was making lots of the wrong thing, that's waste and you want to eliminate it. But in the complex space, that's not actually waste, or much of it is not waste, it's learning. So when we start looking at a DevOps view on the software space, we start thinking about two things, right? What are the wastes that we need to just eliminate? Like the production line stuff that we just need to eliminate. And what are the things that we need to optimize or maximize the effectiveness in that space? So in the elimination or complete elimination of waste space, you're looking at things like automation, right? Automation is a key part of DevOps. It's an outcome of the DevOps philosophy is automation, right? So we want to automate away anything that we can automate away. And if we can't automate it away, we want to figure out how can we get to a place where we can automate it away. Anything that's repetitive, anything that people are doing repeatedly, anything that's a set of steps that people are following are all things that people will get wrong, right? Are you familiar with the story of the Knight Capital Group? It's quite a famous DevOps faux pas. So the Knight Capital Group was an what were they? Like a stock trading company in the US. They were listed on the New York Stock Exchange, so they're a lot of insight into what they did and what went wrong. And they decided they were going to deploy a new version of their product, and a number of things went wrong that we know about because it was a public company, and the reasons why things go wrong in public companies is public, right? So they started the day with $400 million in the bank, actual active capital. We've got $400 million in the bank, and they were doing a new release that day, but they'd made some mistakes. One of the mistakes was that they'd reused feature flags that nobody thought was being used for anything anymore. You already know where those mistakes are going, right? That's a big one in the software engineering space. Reusing something you think isn't used anymore is always a mistake. And then when they had a deployment, they had one person doing the deployment, and they were doing it manually, and they had to deploy to 8 servers following this script. So when the person did the deployment, they actually deployed to only 8 of the 9 servers, and then the system started working funny, not doing what it was supposed to do. And because it was all manual processes, they couldn't figure out what the problem was, and it took them till the end of the day to figure out what the problem was, right? You can imagine you've done a deployment and it takes you till the end of the day to figure out. Unfortunately, the minute from the morning when they did the deployment till the end of the day, they had to file for bankruptcy. They'd lost all their money and more and had to file for bankruptcy because of a failed deployment. That's a huge amount of risk for an organization that I bet the leadership of the company didn't understand the risk, because lots of companies and companies' leaders look at technology and they make, get that evil technology thing away from me. I don't understand how this works. You go deal with it. And then they wonder why it doesn't work. They wonder why teams feel under pressure to deliver features and don't build in quality. They wonder why they don't have automation for things, right? Or maybe they don't wonder that part. So DevOps, if that company had DevOps practices, all of those systems would be automated, and they would probably be doing releases more frequently. So they would be smaller. They would be able to do checks as they went along and see where the failure was, and they would know that the 8th or the 9th deployment didn't happen or didn't work, right? And they would be able to isolate on the problem much more quickly and deal with it, and we'd be hemorrhaging less money. There are places where this is high risk and there are places where it's low risk, right? But even somebody like Facebook, their lead time, effective lead time from developer committing code to a repo to being in production is only 14 minutes. That's tiny. How do you get there? Well, you need to be thinking of these practices as you're building your product. You need to design your product with this idea. If you're thinking of DevOps philosophies, you need to design it with that in mind, which means lots of automation. You need automated testing. You need fast automated testing. You need automated deployments. You need automated server builds. You need everything should be automated, and infrastructure as code, right, is a big part of that story. Everything should be automated. So when you find a mistake, you fix it once and it never happens again, rather than having a script. My favorite example of following scripts being a bad idea is I used to teach a training course for testers. And you would think if there was one group of people in the world that were experts at following a set of steps and telling you whether they worked out or not, right? They're following the steps for the tests 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, do that. But we had labs in that training, and every single training, half the people in the room would struggle to complete the labs because they're not following the steps in order. They've missed something, they've missed a step, they're not following the instructions that are on the page. If even somebody whose whole job it is struggles to follow a set of steps, everybody else it's impossible, right? It's not our whole job, and we make mistakes anytime we do something. So part of DevOps is that automation piece. But there's a more holistic idea around DevOps. Have you heard of the 3 ways of DevOps? Have you heard that phrase, the 3 ways of DevOps? So we teach that in the APS SD class as part of that story. But it's actually really connects back to a lot of the other things that we teach in Agile. And so the first way of DevOps is effectively flow and systems thinking, right? You're looking at that whole system of how we produce our product and figuring out where are the places we need to automate, where are the places we need to eliminate waste, defining what our process is, because we make a lot of assumptions about what we do. And part of that would likely be creating a Kanban board for a definition of workflow for the teams that are working on this product as well, right? So you've got full that's the visualization and transparency piece, and seeing the whole picture. And then the second way is amplifying feedback loops, right? That connects directly back to most of the stories that we have in Agile, but in a more procedural, regimented, scientific way, right? We talk a lot in Agile about the fluffy stuff more than we talk about the actual theory and the application of proven theories into practice, right? We talk a lot more about the fluffy stuff, but the application of the theories into practice is how we optimize our overall system. So the second way is amplifying those feedback loops, get that. And I guess they talk about dev and ops, right? But really it's all feedback loops, dev and ops, all the way through to the customer, collecting telemetry, right? So that you know what the customer is really doing. And then the third way is creating a culture of continuous experimentation and learning. Again, we talk about this in the Agile space. So when somebody says, what is DevOps? It's a much more complicated question than just saying, well, we're going to have an automated build, right? We're going to do continuous delivery. These are all practices that are a result of the underlying philosophy of flow and systems thinking. Once we've got that, we can then figure out how to amplify those feedback loops, connect them back together, create more feedback loops. And then once we've got our feedback loops, we can then, remember, if you eliminate waste in the creative space, you want to have potentially failures. So we then have to figure out how we have a culture of experimentation. And the whole idea of an experiment means it could be successful or it could fail, right? And we learn from the failures, again, amplifying those feedback loops. So it's all connected together. I just think that for me, DevOps is the mechanics of Agile. It's particularly for software teams, right? The DevOps story was developed for software teams. My background is software engineering, so my focus is helping software teams, right? In other areas, you would need to create the equivalent of DevOps, like application of lean flow, systems thinking, feedback loops, culture of continuous experimentation and learning. How would you do that in other spaces? Like if you were an accountancy practice, what does that look like? Well, you'll need to figure that out in that space. But for us, it's actually a no-brainer. One of the questions that you had was, does every software company need DevOps? And my answer is always, well, duh, right? I mean, the do you want to for me, it's like asking the question, do you want to manage risk? Do you want effective processes? Do you want high quality? If you want those things, you need a DevOps philosophy within your organization. If you want to be able to do agile and you're building software products, you cannot do that without the DevOps as well. They are intrinsically linked. When we talk about, remember we talked about evidence-based management? This is actually, I've been thinking about this a lot. In evidence-based management, the top half of evidence-based management is talking about market value, and the bottom half of evidence-based management is talking about organizational capability. If you're a software organization, or the parts of your organization that are software organizations, organizational capability is DevOps, right? That's that philosophy of that philosophy is what creates that organizational capability. And Agile, a lot of the time, focuses on that value proposition, right? We talk about value creation rather than revenue extraction. We talk about empathetically connecting the people doing the work to the ideas that are trying to create, so that we get everybody working together in a common direction towards a common goal. I think they're just so complementary, they're almost inseparable for software organizations. That was a bit of a rant, but hopefully it was useful.
It was. And I've heard a story. I love stories. I love examples. So thank you very much for that. So you emphasized the importance of culture, the culture of experimentation. You gave great examples and what we can achieve thanks to DevOps. This is the way for us to achieve those outcomes. So my next question is, so in my experience, when we are talking about relatively small company, um, we can make a lot of those investments. There's smaller scale, and I felt like it was much easier to introduce changes and build this culture. What if we are big size company and we realize that DevOps is the way? What kind of challenges we might have, and what piece of advice you would share with such company?
It's
Yeah.
yeah. It, it's exactly the same challenge that organizations hit with implementation of any change, right? So it's change, it's doing things in a different way, whether it's Agile or DevOps. I think the answer is the same, and that's that all of the policies and procedures in your organization have been designed to maintain the status quo, right? Your organization starts with no policies and procedures when it's a new fledgling. There's a couple of people in a garage. I know that's not always true, but you know what I mean. A couple of people in a garage, and then you get to a certain size. I think it's, for me, it's about 25 people, where you can't just make it up as you go along anymore. You have to start agreeing on ways to do things. And then you build and build and build those agreements on the ways to do things. But at some point, that sand between the people becomes cement, right? It becomes bureaucracy. It becomes red tape, right? And that is very difficult to change. So with any change, to get to a new organizational state where you're able to adopt anything new, this is even true if you just adopt a new piece of software, right? Regardless of what it is, you adopt a new thing, it's going to have an impact on the policies and procedures of the organization. And the difficulty with both Agile and DevOps is that impact is massive and systemic across the organization. It's a new way of doing business. Example, right? I know you love examples. So Microsoft have a little product called Windows. right? It's a very little product. You might not have heard of it, but they have this product called Windows. And prior to Windows 10, it was delivered on a 6-yearly basis. Not only was it delivered on like once every 6 years, but if you were a big company, like I had a customer that was a really big company, and they built a product that was very expensive, $50,000 a license for their customers. If they had a problem, they could browbeat Microsoft into making a specific change in Windows just for them, and Microsoft would ship them a little patch, a hotfix that was just for them and their customers, and they could distribute it to their customers. This, our product's not working for you. Install this Microsoft fix, and that'll do it. But then you end up, think about from a lean perspective, you end up with so many combinations of your product in the market. How do you maintain and support and test for every combination of your product in the market when you've got millions of hot fixes out there that take your product into various states, right? It's almost impossible. But that was how Microsoft did business, right? All the way through. So that's interacting with the market, their organization interacting with the market, their customers. That's how they did business. And then they started working on Windows 10. And the idea behind Windows 10 was they weren't going to work that way. There are no, none is probably too strong, right? But I'm going to say it anyway. There are no hot fixes for Windows 10 that everybody doesn't get. There are no things done specifically for a customer. There are no specific patterns for specific customers. They might incorporate things into the main product, but everybody gets it. Windows 10 was the first step on that story, and they had to change their entire business model. They had to change how they sell Windows, how they license Windows, because no longer can you say, I've got a version from 8 months ago, I've got a problem with it. Fix it. We're a big company, we're not upgrading to the latest version, just fix it. Well, if we do that, we then have a bifurcation of our product, right? And we don't want that. We want to get those people onto the main version and then fix that. So what's the answer to that? Well, you need it in your terms of service that you must take every update, right? Otherwise, we're not going to support you. You are out of support. And Windows 10 is if you don't take the third update you don't take, the third monthly update you don't take, it brings up a big massive warning that says if you don't take this, you're going to be out of support. Fast forward to Windows 11, and it's pretty much every update has the same story, right? If you're not on the latest version, they're the first thing they're going to say when you ask for support is, what version are you on? This one. Upgrade to the latest version. See if the problem still persists. If it still persists, then we'll help you, right? And that is a completely different way of engaging with your customers. It's a completely different way of doing business. They started moving to a model not of being really secretive and not talking to their customers for 6 years till they released the product, which resulted in the Windows 8 debacle that everybody hated, right? But in continuous delivery to their customers. So I'm on the insider build for Windows. I'm on the beta build. I get weekly builds from the dev branch of the Windows team, from the dev branch, right? So a week, the code that is in my copy of Windows is only been drying for a week, right? That's pretty close to the engineering team. So when I provide telemetry, I provide feedback, I say something's not working, the engineering teams are working on those PCs and can fix them right away. But by the time it gets 3 months down the line, not so much. But there are 17 million people in that group. So they've brought those ideas of DevOps, looking at the flow and systems thinking. How do we automate the processes and make them faster? They're amplifying feedback, right? The second way. And they build inside of their organization. They're already in Windows, they're already doing A/B testing in production. right? So a culture of continuous experimentation and learning. Those things are allowed now. They're not only allowed, they're expected. My favorite definition of done comes out of Microsoft. I'm just going to get it up so I can read it for you, because I think your listeners will like it. I can send you a copy so you can put it with it. But I'm just not very good at remembering stuff on the fly, which is why I have to go look it up. That's a Martin thing. My memory sucks. I remember where things are, but not exactly what they say. So this is the definition of done, and this is the definition of done from the AzureDevOps team at Microsoft, who were the catalyst for all of those Agile changes within they were the first team to show that Agile worked at scale, because they went all in on it on 3-week deliveries. And their definition of done is live in production, collecting telemetry, supporting or diminishing the starting hypothesis. That's their definition of done. Right? And that's not their engineering team's definition of done, which will have specific things that they have to run, right? This is their business definition of done, right? Their organizational definition of done for that part of the organization. That every team must do this. How they do it, that's up to them. That's their problem to go figure out. That's the technical details. But from a business's perspective, I want to see every feature you build on a 3-weekly basis, live and in production. I want it to be collecting telemetry. And I want that telemetry to suggest to you whether you've achieved the outcome you were expecting or not, which means you have to have a hypothesis at the start. Experiment-based, hypothesis-driven engineering practices, right? This is the very epitome of DevOps. This is the whole idea. In order to have that definition of done and meet that, think of all of the other stuff that's going to impact in the organization. First off, live and in production every 3 weeks. The Azure DevOps team have shipped to production every 3 weeks for the past 12 years. Imagine that. Every 3, well, okay, I'm saying every. They missed a couple of times at Christmas because there just wasn't enough features to justify the rollout and people available and that kind of thing. So they didn't maybe miss a couple for that. Their first release, their third release, and their 6th release were total car crashes. That was early on. That's like Sprint 1, Sprint 3, and Sprint 6 were total car crashes. And they had to reset a bunch and figure out how they deal with their quality issues because they just started doing it and they sucked at it, right? But they persevered. Rather than backing off, they persevered, pushed through. This is a business imperative. We must be able to close the feedback loop. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to build stuff that our customers need when they need it. Or we're going to be irrelevant. Our product's going to be gone because it's not servicing our customers. That's this idea, right? That's what we're talking about when we talk about implementing DevOps within an organization. It has ramifications for how you fund products, how you engage with customers, how you sell products for customers, how you talk to customers, all the way through to how you build and actually write the products that you're creating. Just the same as Agile does, right? These are intrinsic philosophical changes that fundamentally impact on the way your organization functions and runs. There's not a way for a business leader to say, go install DevOps in our organization and that's it. No, it's going to impact all the way up to the CEO. The CEO's job is going to change. The way they engage with customers is going to change. The way the whole business functions is going to change. My favorite big change that Microsoft made was around Azure. The sales folks, this is the one that I'm talking a lot with professional services organizations and other software as a service organizations at the moment, that they still exist. A lot of them still exist in a world where the sales team there's an English expression, write checks that the engineering teams can't cash, right? they promise things to the customer that are impossible to deliver, and then the engineering team have to pull out all the stops and cut quality to deliver whatever ridiculous crap they've been told to deliver, right? And one of the things that was happening inside of Microsoft was that the sales folks were bonused based on the number of Azure hours they sold to a customer, right? So if you sell $1 million of Azure to a customer, you get 10% of that. There's my 100 grand bonus for the year. One customer. Yeah, I don't think it's 10%, right? But yeah, I'm awesome, right? But then that customer gets to the end of the year and they realize they've only used 50,000 of the million hours they've bought. How much waste is that, right? They're not happy with their purchase, and perhaps they don't purchase again, or perhaps they kick up a stink and you end up in the papers and suddenly you're hurting your corporate brand. Oh, Azure's really expensive because we bought all this time and then we didn't use it, right? So they made a really simple tweak that resulted in about 60% of the salespeople leaving. And that tweak was, you don't get your bonus for the amount you sell, you get your bonus for the amount the customer uses. So now the most powerful salesperson is not the person who can close the deal, right? A closer. That was the sales power, was the closer. Now it's, what can I do to help enable my customer to maximize their usage of the product? Perhaps I could give them some free training. Perhaps I could get some consultants in to help them use these services a little bit better. And I'm going to make my bonus because they're using more services. And in fact, Microsoft is very, very big on Agile and DevOps into their customers, because they know that as you try and move faster and you try and do infrastructure as a service and you try and do those things, you need cloud services, right, to help with that. Therefore, Microsoft helping a company get better at DevOps, change their business practices, be more effective in the market, actually is the thing that helps them sell the tool they're trying to sell. So all of their salespeople become coaches and DevOps and Agile consultants. No, they're not really, right? But enabling, that's their goal, is to enable that. They become facilitators for that story almost overnight. That's a complete change in the way you do business. It's a complete change in that role and what it's trying to achieve and how they go about doing it. That's the level of impact that we're talking about from the philosophy perspective of implementing DevOps and Agile.
I love
Did
that
I
because
actually answer the question somewhere in there? Maybe I did.
yes, I love that because I feel like with every single question, you are broadening perspective on the topic, you know? It becomes broader and broader, and I feel like we are touching super important topics. So there are significant changes happening, and it's not about the coders, right?
Yeah,
It's something big for the company, cultural changes, and also potential benefits. Although it's an investment, I feel like it's also something that we should emphasize. It's a game that has important rewards in the end. So how quickly we can react, how quickly we can spot errors, how we can overcome some of the challenges and risks, you know?
yeah. And I think one of the things that I think really powerful things that came out of Microsoft is Microsoft's transition towards agility and DevOps and bringing in those practices. Is they started considering this idea of, they call it one ES, one engineering system. And the idea of one ES is that you want your people focusing on solving the business problems, right? You don't want them struggling to figure out how to do stuff every day. That's a waste, right? If you've got an engineer and they were working on Windows, and now you need them to go work on Office, right? They moved from Windows to Office. How long does it take them to get up to speed? They're already inside of the organizational culture. They already understand the coding platforms, right? But how long does it take them to get up to speed? How do they find their work items? How do they know where their automated builds are, or how to write them, or where to put them, or how to run them, or all of those things? If you don't answer those questions, and this is thing, engineers love this, right? You're an engineer as well. We'll go solve that problem, right? If somebody doesn't give us a way to solve the problem, we'll figure out a way to solve the problem, and every way will be unique. So you'll have 50 teams in your organization. I worked with a company in Norway, and they had 93 teams working on one product. And it was 93 teams in 13 locations in 9 different countries. And all of those teams, because they weren't given a way to solve their problems, solved them themselves. So they all picked whatever build system. They're working on one product, right? That burnt on a one C. I'm showing my age. Burnt onto one CD and handed to the customer, right? One installer. And they all used different source control systems. There was 9 different source control systems in use in the company, from Git to Subversion to TFVC, all the way through to a custom source control system that the company who'd been building software for 30 years built before there were good source control systems that people were still using. So they had a custom in-house one, and different instances of it all over the company. And that meant that when they were creating a system, we want continuous delivery, we want to build this every day, and they approached it from a brute force perspective, right? They said, right, we'll create a build team, and they'll collect all of this data from all of the code from all of the different people and all the different branches, and they'll build the system. And they ended up creating a system that, in order to have a usable working product every 24 hours, they were doing 11,000 builds a day. That's 1.2 million builds a year, pushing 27 petabytes of build data around just to compile this product, because all of the systems were so fragmented. And one of the biggest changes that we made to that system was, let's get it all in one place. Let's have one place where the source code exists. So when they actually had automated builds, so that when they created a new version of the product, right, for the next release, the automated build would go out and create the releases in all the 96 other teams areas, create the branches, right? So automated branch creation, automated branch fold down for 96 different environments. It was just mental. We got everybody into one environment, and suddenly all of those problems went away. Suddenly we didn't have to do 11,000 builds. Suddenly we didn't have to have 40 build machines. Suddenly when all this cost suddenly disappeared, right? That's that flow and systems thinking part. What is going on? Okay, well, is that the right way to do it? Can we simplify it? And this idea of one engineering system is about figuring out, well, what are the tools we're going to use to build our product? And how do we create a tool within our organization that allows us to build any product on any technology, but we all know where our stuff is, right? I know where I go to another product, I know where their work items are. I'm helping out, I've got feedback for another team, I know where their work items are, I know where their backlog is, I know where their code is, I know where their builds are, I can go look at those things. I want to contribute a pull request, right? I want to fix something for them because I know the problem and I can just go fix it and submit a pull request. I know how to do that already. I don't have to go searching, I don't have to talk to them, I can just do it. That's this idea of one engineering system. Does everybody in your organization, is that a slick, easy, quick process so that we improve flow? And this comes down to, there's a quote by Satya Nadella. This happened in Microsoft after Satya took over. Satya replaced Steve Ballmer, who was a sales guy with a sales background. with Satya, who was an engineering guy with an engineering background, right? I mean, he's got a lot of business focus and he's a business person, but he has an engineering background. And I'm just going to quote him here, which I think is another one of my favorite quotes. And it's, there cannot be a more important thing for an engineer, for a product team, than to work on the systems that drive our productivity. So I would, any day of the week, trade off features for our own productivity. I want our best engineers, our best people to work on our engineering systems so that later on we can come back and build all of the new concepts we want. Right? That underlying philosophy from the CEO on down in the organization, that if you're the senior person, I don't want you working on the product. I want you working to make everybody else more effective. That effectiveness is more important. Now, he uses the word productivity, right? Which is management speak. And the way I think about it, productivity, effectiveness is part of productivity. There's also a part of productivity that's everybody's got their butt in a seat and is working all day. And that's not the good part of productivity, the effectiveness part, which is why I use effectiveness. But that focus is effectively a holistic, I want to phrase it as a holistic Scrum Master, right? It's not Scrum Master as a person, right? It's that Scrum Master as a philosophy inside of the organization, and this is our focus. How do we become more effective? How do we get better at what we do, right? Culture of continuous experimentation and learning. How do we build that? So, enabling that allows the organization to, the data is really compelling, right? There was a study recently, you might need to search for it. I think Forbes has an article on it that talked about the fallacy of trading speed for features. It's an absolute falsehood that you can go faster and deliver more features by reducing quality and have a successful product. It doesn't ever work out well, ever. You always have a much more expensive cost than the revenue that was returned in order to fix the problems that you created by cutting quality to improve speed. So that's that piece. And I think that story is cutting corners is a bad idea when you're doing complex work. And most organizations don't generally understand that they're cutting corners. I think that's the difficulty. You know, the VP of marketing doesn't understand that when he says to the team, just ship it, right? He's giving them license to put the business at risk. And he doesn't understand that risk enough to make that decision. I use a little trick with teams all the time, because a lot of teams get asked to cut quality, right? If somebody's asking them to cut quality, whether it's their product owner, which is the worst case, right? That means product owner doesn't know what they're doing. But usually it's somebody in management or leadership is saying, well, we need to ship this now. We need to get it out the door. We need to do this. Don't do it. You are going to do it because you don't want to get fired, right? But don't do it without a signed letter from the CFO of your company acknowledging the risk. And be clear about the risk. I want this letter. And I guarantee you that CFO is going to look at the risk and go, what why would I sign this? But it's the people in between that don't understand the risk or don't care, right? Don't care about the risk, that are causing that impact on the team, or the sales guy just trying to reach his numbers so he gets his bonus, right? Those are the folks that shouldn't be making those decisions, but they are, because they're putting other people under pressure and then having a tantrum when they don't get the thing they want, and somebody in leadership is just saying, "Oh, just make it happen," right? I don't want this guy complaining at me anymore. You guys just make this work, and that's an abdication of risk, and it's organizational incompetence of leadership, right? And I think that's fundamentally the story of DevOps, is one of deep competence in what it is we're trying to do, of bringing in those flow techniques because we know we need them, talking about and implementing systems thinking because we know we need it, getting feedback because we know we need it, making the changes that we know we need. Yeah, it's super big. It's super deep and impactful across the organization.
Thank you.
So I think I was rambling at the end there, but my brain was going faster than I can formulate the ideas.
I have one last request because every video from Joanna's tribe needs its own hashtag. And you've talked about a lot of great things, and I cannot decide what should be our hashtag of our today's recording. So, do you have any suggestion for that?
I like one engineering system. I like that. Or engineering excellence. I like that
Uh-huh.
too. Or just DevOps,
Or just
right? If
DevOps?
the topic's
Make it
DevOps,
simple.
make it simple. DevOps, it's a well known term. People are familiar with it. That's what I would go with. I would put the other ones in as well, but that would be the one I would lead with.
Okay, so we have it. So hashtag DevOps is our hashtag of the video, but feel free to add more. And with that, thank you very much, Martin, for your time, for your commitment, for stories, examples. Yes, I love stories. I love examples. I found this conversation very powerful. I'm going to use it to inspire others. And if any of you has any question request, I will also leave some contact details so you can talk to Martin. You can ask questions
Anytime.
anytime. And thank you very much. See you next time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.